Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Democracy is the issue tonight, and a potential strategy, a potential app that's going to dramatically improve democracy in Canada and potentially around the world. My guest is Murray Simser, who is a fascinating guy, and we'll maybe get a little bit more into his background because he is Canadian. He's a political junkie, activist, involved individual, but then went to Silicon Valley and got very involved in high tech, made some money, and then decided to move back to Canada and really change democracy by launching this app that is just recently, this past week, launched. Murray, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm terrific. Thank you, Brian, for having me on.
My pleasure. So tell us, what is Citizn, which you are launching? Or have launched?
Well, fundamentally, Citizn is called the People's API. And in nerd tech speak, an API means access to all the information about a particular thing. So you can imagine Citizn provides the voice of the people through a technical means to the government and anybody else who wants to know what it is. And it's made possible by the organizing principle of a social network called Citizn, one in each country. Every person who is of electoral age is invited to join. And those people, through simple means like a notification on their phone, will be asked to come in and participate in highly credible conversations about their government and the order that the government is currently managing, according to the federal paper, the Gazette. And so at the end of the day, what it means is real people will have a real measured voice. And that voice will be the most predictive set of data that is available in any polity. And behind me, you can see sort of a phrase we launched at Collision. Collision is the Olympics of tech. It's where startup CEOs go to show off their wares and compete with the best startups in the world for capital. And we did just that last week. So we're launched. And one last thing, this is not just a tech company. This is the voice of the people, which means I can't run it. We don't want anybody who's a tech guy owning that information. And so at the end of September, we are launching Towards a Charlottetown for the 21st Century. And this, Brian, is the first time I'm saying this publicly on your show. And a press release will go out on Tuesday about this. Towards a Charlottetown for the 21st Century. And Citizn is going to make that possible.
So a Charlottetown conference.
Yes, indeed.
And what's this Charlottetown conference going to do? It's going to decide how this democracy, this democratization of decision making is going to be controlled and spread around.
Indeed. In fact, for the last 6 months, a body of 40 people who are called ambassadors for Citizn have been writing the draft constitution for Citizn Canada Inc., which is a subsidiary of our tech company. That corporation will not be governed by us. It'll be governed by the people of the country. That board of 40 people, the good and the great of the country, everything from ex-cabinet ministers, founders of great tech companies, mega entrepreneurs, pundits, academics, journalists, professors, they have written the Constitution of Citizn Canada to make sure that all of the crazy making that goes on in social media does not exist in this beautiful social network that we're creating. The purpose, therefore, of that conference is to finalize and sign that Constitution and hand control of Citizn Canada to the people of Canada.
Okay, so Murray, let me try to understand. Is this a poll? Is it an app? Is it a social media interaction entity like Facebook or Instagram, or is it actual direct democracy and referenda?
Well, I had I can answer it in a funny way. I had a conversation with somebody the other day that said, you're going to have to register as a lobbyist if you create this company. And I said, no, I'm not. Okay. And we're going to fight this concept. This is, in point of fact, the people who are already recognized in the Constitution as the most powerful polity that exists in a country, but they are not organized and able to express themselves. All we are doing is taking that voice and expressing it. We take no side. We are not partisan. What we want to do is enable the beautiful Canadian democracy that's already built into the Canada Act of 1982 and the British North America Act before that, and make sure that people actually are governed on the basis of informed consent. And the way we're going to do that is by providing people the ability to truly understand what's going on, regardless of how fancy they are and whether or not they have the education or a political science degree. Every person in this country is going to be measured, counted, and all of their needs are going to be understood. And once we've done that, once we've given that power to the people, the expression, the data that comes out of that social network with no cuckoo in it, will ultimately become the basis of a business model that allows us to sell access to that data so that anybody who needs to understand what the people want, government, journalists, academics, anybody in the world that needs to understand political data, there's about $200 billion currently spent in the world to figure that out, and we're going to disrupt all of it.
We're chatting tonight with Murray Simser. He is the founder of an app, a direct democracy, a social media something or other that is called Citizn, that is going to really, he thinks, revolutionize democracy in Canada and potentially around the world. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Murray Simser. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Murray Simser, and just last week, he at the big Collision Technology Conference in Toronto, he launched his app, Citizn. I apologize, and he's talking about having a constitutional conference in September. So it really will not be Simser. It'll be very much something controlled and organized by us, by a constitution, by the people, and he's attempting to really get information to the people such that people can end up having a point of view that will influence our politics. Murray, in the last provincial election, only 43% of the people turned out.
Yeah.
People really care about politics? Do they care about government? Do they care so much so that they're going to actually listen to whatever it is that you're saying on Citizn?
Well, I think that you've hit the nail on the head. People don't give a rat about politics right now. And in point of fact, if you look at the data that you get through the Edelman Vermont Trust Barometer, the Economist Intelligence Units, two of the more credible measures of trust in government, people not only don't trust their governments, they're completely disaffected. 20 years ago, we were starting to see sort of a reduction in interest in democracy, but it's really fallen off the cliff now.
And 43%
look at the last election, 1 in 5 people elected a government. If you split roughly down half the people voted for Ford, half the people voted for some other party. That means that sort of less than 20% of the people picked the government. Like, that's a pretty astonishing expression of the disinterest that people have in government. In fact, it's plain. Nobody thinks they can control the government, and our system will not only let them control it, they don't have to try to control it using this. All they have to do is actively participate in a couple of notifications a day, a couple of minutes a day, and they will have total control over their governments. That's the innovation.
They don't have control because the government doesn't have to follow whatever comes out of your process, right?
That is correct. They do not have to. But let me tell you something. If the government has in their hands the recipe for electoral harmony, that is, this is what the people specifically want, and they have thought about it in the same way that, say, a committee has, the legislature has, the parties have, the PMO or the Premier's office in Ontario's case, why wouldn't they listen to it? The problem today is there is no data that's accurate enough to do what I'm proposing. And so if you assume for a second that I can mathematically achieve that, my question then becomes, okay, maybe they still don't listen. And there's no mechanism. We're not trying to change the constitution of the country. We're only trying to constitute a group that can express this problem. Now, here's the measure. If at the end of the day, they don't listen to the most predictive data that's out there, the people are going to know it. Now, the second part of Citizn isn't just, oh, we've got good data. The second part of Citizn is making sure that the people who are in the country have the agency to be able to do it. That is the power to influence the government if the government doesn't listen. That's why Citizn is going to be sold to the users once the investors have backed it and made it healthy. And we're going to put up to billions of dollars into a fund every year in Canada and every other country for that matter, that's going to be at the disposal of people. Now, what government who is offered a carrot, do what we want, or a stick, don't do what we want, and we'll use the billions of dollars that we have at our disposal to influence you in a manner that's appropriate, whether through lawsuits, protests, or other civic actions that will remedy the problem. And frankly, I think governments are smarter than that. If they can find out there's a way to satisfy the electorate and win an election, I think they'll take it.
But what you're talking about really is just a more accurate poll, a polling of the Canadian people that has a far greater sample size, because it potentially is everyone. And I guess hopefully what we're going to provide is a little bit more information, because one of the issues that people have with polls is, are people really knowledgeable about the problem and the issues and the laws? And so therefore you're going to educate them. But it's still just a poll of people. It's not a referendum that actually has some legal weight that would actually force acceptance by government. And, I could argue with you. I think that, in the United States, the Republican Party is very supportive of what the Supreme Court decided in regards to Roe v. Wade, even though most polls say that something like 70% of the people actually support access to abortion and are pro-choice.
Yes.
In Canada, the Green Party, only elected one member in the last provincial election, but get, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was 6% or something like that of the popular vote. And so therefore should have had, something like 8 seats in the legislature if we had proportional representation. And again, over 50, 70%, I think in most polls of Ontarians and of Canadians support measures that are combating climate change. But if they only get to elect with our system, one member, and only, even though they get a sizable percentage of the popular vote, that doesn't get represented. Government doesn't listen. Government listens to their base, don't they? Don't parties just listen to their base? Because that's how in our system you get elected, by motivating the base, by diminishing the turnout of other parties. You think about what Ford, lots of people talked about him sleepwalking his way, running a leader-oriented, a front-runner-oriented campaign, trying to not appear in front of the media, not trying to get media attention, not trying to spur turnout, really trying to keep turnout down, because he knew his base would elect them to a majority government. And as you pointed out, 20% of the population effectively elected one of the strongest majority governments that we've had in a long time.
100%. Now let's talk about your principal point here. Will governments only listen to their base? The answer is not even a minute. Governments don't give a rap about their base anymore. What we can actually measure in all elections since about 2012 is that governments are not elected by their base anymore. They're not elected by sort of the first past the post type system we have here in Canada. They're not elected by democratic ground games. They're not elected by lawn signs, door knocking. None of that stuff statistically matters at all, okay? And it became a really serious issue after the 2016 election, where social media had finally sort of hit the 100% penetration rate, where people were influenced by these 6 or so algorithms that were mediating their relationships to government. Now, let's be crystal clear on this point. The government no longer gives a rat about anybody except the reach on social media. Why would I care about talking to 40 people in a room at a union meeting when I can go online and gaslight somebody and put a post up and get 1 million views? This is the weight of the current situation. And so governments are going to continue to behave that way until you can tell them behaving that way is for naught, and it's not going to benefit you to do that. Once you have this in place, the basis of this is not a grand poll, as you suggested, and I'll debate you on that point, because this is meant to elevate a person into what I call moderated discourse as the basis for their knowledge about the government that governs them. Moderated discourse, deliberative polling is totally different than the polls that we have today. You randomly call somebody, ask them a question, they may or may not have any information. Everything that's going to be done on this platform is going to first be seeded with objective information produced by credible third parties, okay? And the media. So every time, let's say, for instance, the United States right now, abortion is the rage because of the decision of the Supreme Court. Now, if you think about that as something that needs to now be discussed at the states level, you would think that you would want to have an informed debate about the subject. But the fact is they don't want to have an informed debate today because you don't have to. This is going to put the informed debate in place. And then the people who would otherwise just side with this gaslight or that gaslight or this position or that position because they're intractably opposed to change their minds because they don't think that changing their mind matters, it becomes tribal. And we're going to eliminate that tribal behavior by doing exactly what the study America in One Room did, published by Stanford University a couple of years ago. And that is, if you bring all these people who claim I will absolutely not change my mind, they can solve all third rail issues. Abortion, Social Security, go through the list in America. Up here, it's healthcare, immigration, all of these things ultimately the sort of crazy making disappears when people have full and good information up front. And today, governments aren't giving any of that. And it's our job to fix it. We are the masters of our own democracies, or we lose those democracies. And Citizn
people actually want
to make that happen.
Do people actually want that objective information? Don't they like living in their little echo chambers? And you see over and over again that people are just listening to people that agree with them. They're not actually wanting to hear that contradictory point of view.
That's right. That's a tale as old as time, Brian. The allegory of the cave, I think we should all go back to it and sort of look at it. Most people are blissfully unaware of the choices they're making. And I don't mean that they're ignorant. I just mean that they've got lives and kids and jobs. Most of them don't have the sort of bandwidth to be able to do this in a world that's moving as rapidly as this. It's high time the politics catches up to the internet. And Citizn's going to make that possible so that mothers and fathers who don't have extra time can actively participate in politics without running down to their local riding association and getting into a machine that won't value them.
Okay, so if we want to check it out, what do we do?
You go to our website and you sign up. There's a sign up link. You put your email in there. You will receive an invitation to download either an Android or an iOS. And then eventually, once it's in the App Store, you can just download it whenever you like.
And when I download it, what happens?
You're going to find that there's a basic social network that's there. Now, remember, I asked for special dispensation for everybody because this is the first country that we're launching it in, which means there are no users or very few users. So give us between now and the end of September to launch this thing. Give us feedback. There's a little hamburger menu at the top of the app, 3 lines in it. If you click on it, you can say, give app feedback, and you can actually give suggestions, make ideas. We will take all of them and we will bake them into the platform. And as I say, in September, at the end of September, the fully baked app will be available for everybody to use, and you can start to govern yourself.
And so I had been arguing for a referendum. How does this differ from a referendum?
Well, in a referendum, you require the government's assent to have a referendum, and then the backing of the election committees or the election corporations to actually get them done. They carry the weight of law, and they also, to a degree, carry the weight of the people, okay? That marriage gives it its strength. If I could produce something stronger than that, if I could create an output that was statistically more powerful than that, there's nobody that's going to argue that it carries weight. Ultimately, what I hope is going to happen is that we're going to find ourselves in a situation where it's not an antagonistic proposition to the government to hear the weight that the people want to carry, but rather guidance that the government can actually wrap their minds around. And instead of fighting over what we should do, the people will decide what we should do with Citizn. The government can fight over how best to do it, okay? So what I want is a future where the government is responsible for how we get things done, and the people are responsible for what we want done.
I'm not going to quote it exactly, but I think it was Mulroney that said politicians don't actually want to lead. They want to find a parade and get to the front of it.
That is entirely correct. And we're going to modify the backstabbing, baby kissing nonsense that qualifies as politicianing these days. Okay. Politics should be about finding the right compromise to solve and it creates solutions in a society. Regrettably, today it's about gaslighting people and backslapping and nonsense Instagram posts where somebody's out at a restaurant or otherwise. I think it's time we lead ourselves and that the government works for us.
Even if you make it efficient, Murray, even if you make it such that it's not frictionless, but low friction, such that you send out the information and I can do it on my telephone and I can do it in a short period of time. Do people really actually want to spend that much time thinking about the laws of the land and having influence on it?
Well, let's check out the statistics today. How much time do you think they spend doing it now, whining on social media into the air? It's a huge portion of time. 30 minutes a day is already spent there. And what are they getting out of it? Mental illness, okay? You can actually measure the consequences of this disempowerment that's happening, this sort of Stockholming of this coddling of the mind so that people are not responsible for themselves. Democracy is about responsibility. And I think that if people get an app that allows them in 3 minutes a day to have total control over their futures, I think they'll do it. I have more faith in people.
Can you actually get updated on what's going on in the world, what the key political issues are, and have an influence on it in 3 minutes a day?
Absolutely, you can, so long and provided that it's done and in a way that affects government policy. We all know that change.org is the most massive political platform there is. But let me ask you, when was the last time anybody actually paid attention to that as a politician? Scale is not the solution, okay? Everybody thought the biggest voice was going to win. Nonsense. The governments know how to manage that. What we need is quality. Okay, and then quality delivers a qualitative difference in outcome than you would otherwise get with just quantity. We've had enough quantity. It's time to go back to quality. It's time to go back to authority. It's time to put that authority in the hands of regular people. And I think that the Canadian population in particular would love to spend 3 minutes a day managing the politicians and actually knowing they did it.
How are you going to actually get this objective reporting? A lot of people don't think that, CNN or CBC is objective. They think it's left-wing conspiracy. People don't think that Fox is objective. It's right-wing conspiracy. Sun Media, same. Like how and where are you going to get whatever is deemed to be truly objective?
Well, and I think you've hit the nail on the head once again. Let's channel our Marshall McLuhan, shall we? The medium is the message. All of the media outlets you just described are by definition mediating, therefore choosing what the audience sees, okay? By definition, that model's broken. The only reason it didn't break in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, et cetera, is because there was a bandwidth issue forcing qualitative things to rise to the surface, okay? So authority, Peter Mansbridge had to be authoritative. If he looked like a loon, then people wouldn't want to watch his shows. But that's not the case when you have an unlimited broadcasting system that every person has in their hands. And so in that case, you need to modify the conditions under which the data is captured and those choices are made. And what that means is the oversight has to be in the hands of the people. The rules of the road to determine how the algorithm works has to be open sourced and transparent. Everybody's going to guarantee, the people are going to guarantee that everything that you just asked comes to pass. When people have total control over this, not some super nerd that's a coder like me in the background, that's how we're going to achieve the universality of the power in this thing.
Absolutely fascinating. We're chatting tonight with Murray Simser. He is the founder and an individual who is launching Citizn, which is I guess it's an app, a social media, a polling system, almost a referendum that's going to, he thinks, change our democracy. We're going to take a break and come back more with Murray in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting today with Murray Simser, who is the founder of Citizn. He's going to try to change our politics. Murray, why are you doing this? Tell me a little bit about you, and you've been involved in I understand politics, and I also understand you've been in Silicon Valley as a tech entrepreneur. So give me a little bit of sense of who Murray Simser is and what's brought you to this this current stage in your life where you want to change democracy for the better.
Well, there are three things I think that came together recently. One was the sort of state of play in democracies. Since 2012, we've seen a massive decline in what I had previously assumed during my youth were things that would never change, that would be ever present, evergreen. And what I learned over time is the only way something remains evergreen is if we recommit ourselves to the goals that were originally set down by prior generations. And I regret to say, I don't think we're doing that right now. We're not living up to that standard that I think we were gifted by the great giants on whose shoulders we stand. Okay, that's the first thing. So there's a personal motivation behind that. The second thing was I grew up with very little power and very little money, but in a very good family that worked very hard with a lot of dignity and a lot of strength. And that family in today's modern world is not valued in the same way as it would have been. Good, hardworking, sort of lower middle class family or upper working class family. We didn't have anything extra, but we didn't want for anything either. The sort of, the Canadian dream, as it were. That is also going. And the third thing is, I did work in politics when I was a kid at university in the OLOO, in a couple of members' offices on Parliament Hill for the Liberal Party of Canada. I'm no longer affiliated with any party, but I know the game. And I used to do groundwork and door-to-door organizing, campaigning, leadership campaigns, biennial conventions. I mean, I know the system backwards. And the fact of the matter is, there used to be a system where the purpose of the first past the post system was to make sure we had representation across the country that funneled ideas up into a centrality. That no longer exists. There's like 3 people in the country that control the entire legislative calendar. Like, that's weird, okay? In a country of—
We don't have representative democracy anymore?
Rich. Sorry?
We don't have representative democracy anymore?
Oh, we have a democracy, but who controls what we're fighting over or what we're discussing?
Who are these
PMO.
3 people?
And there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose, as a system. But if there's no check against it, then what you have is concentration of power in one person or a couple of people, and everybody else is subordinated. Like when I look at ministers in any cabinet, whether it's Harper or otherwise, ministers are utterly secondary people when it comes to policy setting in the country. And the cabinet is supposed to have more power than that. And the reason they don't have more power than that is because the concentration of power has become unipolar in our government. And, it is what it is. But if we let that continue, that polarity is really going to cause a lot of issues around it. And I want it to stop. Now, why is Silicon Valley important? It is because after I went in politics, I shut down to California and learned how to wreck things and how to reinvent them from the ground up. And when I say wreck things and invent them from the ground up, I mean literally raise an industry to the ground and replace it with something better. Okay, something more efficient. Amazon, for instance, irrevocably altered retail. Okay, this is the power of data-based organizing things like this. We're going to bring every Canadian together. We're going to give them all the data. More than that, we're going to give them the money that's generated off of it. This is going to change everything and the fortunes of everybody, not just because they'll have power over the government, but because the billions of dollars a year that are going to go into this thing are going to give people the ability to solve the problems themselves. So if the government doesn't want to do it, we'll fix it ourselves, and the government will make themselves ultimately irrelevant.
So I've been ranting of late, and I ran in the last election, as you may know.
Congratulations for doing your democratic duty, sir.
It was kind of fun, but I was running on a policy of direct democracy, and the 3 R's were referendum, recall, and proportional representation. And
right.
So, what I was hoping was that with referendum, we get direct democracy, that people have their point of view expressed. And I quoted, Quebec separation and a reinterpretation of our electoral system in Ontario as 2 critically important policies that were actually decided by referendum, because we decided that referendum was the best way to actually decide those things. And so proof positive that referendum are pretty important. And in corporate law, if you got a really big decision like selling all or substantially all of your assets, you got to go to a shareholder vote. It's not good enough to just go to your board of directors. So referendum and proportional representation. And, we talked about, your comment about 20% of the people electing majority government. The statistic that I like but hate is that it actually took 6 more Liberals to elect an MPP than an NDPer in the last election. It took 10 more Greens to elect a MPP than a Conservative voter. Because of our first past the post system, what we did is we magnified dramatically the power of a Conservative voter and minimize the power of a Liberal and an NDP voter. Frankly, in the last federal election, it was different. We maximized the vote of an urban Liberal voter and minimized the voting power of a rural Western Conservative voter.
Right.
And so I wanted to change that. But I guess I was trying to do it with the existing system. And so therefore, I didn't end up having what you called this wreck the existing system structure. So
Yes.
why was what I was doing wrong and what you're doing right?
Well, let's talk about, that's just the philosophy of change, I think, is instructive in this case. The Canadian banking system, for our entire lives, we've been talking about reforming the Canadian banking system, okay? It has its pros, but it also has its cons, okay? The nature of the Canadian banking system is that it's bureaucratic now. It's become these massively, these stable, beautiful institutions, which are wonderful from a stability standpoint. But how did they do in the competition with fintech? The answer is they didn't even notice it. They didn't care because nobody within the structure or the institution of the Canadian banking system had the interest level in changing anything. Okay, along come fintechs. And for the last 20 years, just for clarity, 90% of assets prior to the internet were in banks' hands. And now less than 40% of assets are in banks' hands. That's what fintech did to banks, okay? So the banks have behaved in a way that is sort of protect the core, protect the bureaucracy, protect itself. Governments are no bloody different, nor are political parties. And power is always the same. It concentrates, and once it's become too concentrated, good luck getting it out. The reason and the purpose for people like me, nuts from Silicon Valley, is that we create the competition necessary for people to move their ass, okay? Whether or not we win is irrelevant. But what is relevant is if we don't change it, we're not going to be living in a democracy for long, and we're going to do it. So our job is to innovate to such a degree that you can't ignore us. And I've got 15 years experience in the greatest place for innovation on earth.
Well, I hope you're successful because I am very discouraged. The turnout was a low turnout in Canadian history. Actually, I think it was the second lowest turnout in Canadian history, but it was the lowest turnout in Ontario history.
Right.
And we haven't seen the breakdown demography yet, but based on past studies, 80% of people over the age of 60 vote, and 20% of the age of people of the age of 30 and under vote. And so therefore, young people just don't care, don't think that they can have any impact.
Well, young people are going to have an impact when they download Citizn and they have My Democracy in their pocket. Remember this, there's an old saying that's very instructive. You have to meet people where they are. You can't hope that they're going to become like, people of over 60. 20-year-olds are not 60-year-olds. They have different interests, different motivations, different demographics. And frankly, because I'm a nerd from Silicon Valley, I understand the principle that if it's not actually on a phone, then it's likely not real. Okay,
if it's not on a phone, it's not real.
New category of people.
If it's not on a phone, it's not real. I love that.
It's not real. If you don't have a website, you're not a real company. Well, guess what? We're no longer in that age. Now you're in the age where if it's not on a phone, and if I can't do it on the phone, I'm not interested in talking to you. If the bank doesn't offer a service online, the kids will move elsewhere. Okay, if a retailer doesn't offer full-blown retail access to all their products, they'll move elsewhere. Nobody wants to deal with anything that's not here anymore. And you know what? We're not the first that's going to put it on the phone, but we're the first one that has a real shot of succeeding by putting it on the phone. And this thing is based on novelty.
Why can't I vote on the phone? Why do I have to go to one polling station? I can't go to any polling station in my riding. I can't go to any polling station in all of Ontario. I've got one polling station I can go to and one booth in that one polling station I can go to. And it's only for 10 hours on one day that I can do that.
That's right. And the reason for that, there's sort of studies behind this. Believe it or not, that's an incredibly secure way to manage an election. Okay. And I think that's the primary driver behind Western election structures. If we take the United States, for instance, one of the big fights that people are having down there is when we have used digital systems, there's questionable outcomes because people can manipulate the code or the data or others. And so people lose confidence in those systems very rapidly. This is the reason Citizn is not advocating for modifying the Constitution of Canada and giving us electoral powers in a phone. What we're saying is we're going to create a system that creates such a highly precise data set that instead of that one time every 4 or 5 years, you go and, tick a ballot box, every single day, you're going to have the powers you just described: referenda, recall, and I forget the third one that you mentioned, but
proportional representation, which is
representation. So you'll get all three of these things through Citizn. but you will not threaten the integrity of the election system by introducing Citizen. You'll actually strengthen it. And by giving those powers to people every day, the government irrevocably gets altered without having to. And I'll go back to your point. You said you tried to change the system from within. Good luck. Okay. We need to change the system from without. And that's why the people are going to become the masters of their own domain. And they're going to take control of their governments for the first time in history through this.
Okay. So let's do a case study here. What Canada should be doing, what the West should be doing in regards to the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a very difficult, multifaceted issue. Viscerally, I think a lot of us want to support Ukraine no matter what. But gas prices are up, inflation is up, supply chains have been broken, and because of that, a lot of us are feeling it every time we go to fill up our tanks and we want to buy our products, and when we complain about flying internationally and the borders are sticky and we end up waiting 2 hours for our luggage or longer. And then we've got the issue of, oh my gosh, Germany may freeze this winter because of Russia oil not being shipped. And then we've got the issue of grain from Russia and Ukraine that's not going to be shipped to the Middle East and Northern Africa. And we've got potential food shortages and famine and a multifaceted issue. And then you've got Macron from France saying we cannot allow Putin to be humiliated. We have to give him an exit ramp. And other people saying, no, if we appease and give him an exit ramp, China's going to invade Taiwan. So tell me, with such a multifaceted issue, with so many potential implications, when a lot of people care about is how much gas costs at the gas tank, how would your app, how would your Citizen, how would your phone impact that?
Well, so let's start with that multifaceted nature of the world. Let's all agree the world is multifaceted, okay? Not unifaceted, as every politician would like to have you believe. The next time we talk about climate change, for instance, why don't we talk about it in context, as you proposed? The next time we talk about gas prices, why don't we talk about it in context, as you proposed? The next time we talk about the fact that food prices are going up, let's talk about it in context. There is no context anymore. And what we've developed in this app is the ability to bring context to the masses in something as simple as a Reels that's going to give you the contextual answers you need before you're going to give your opinion about something or prognosticate about how to change the world. Okay, the problem today is that everybody's prognosticating about how to change the bloody world without considering the context of any of the suggestions that you're making. Okay, this is the missing link in democracy. The people have been coddled to such a degree that they no longer think about context when they think about politics. All they think about is the quick and dirty solution to get what they want. They want lower gas prices. Let's talk about lower gas prices. What are you willing, how many deaths are you willing to pay for lower gas prices? For instance, I'm just giving a hyperbolic example to make a point. But if you understand the mechanisms behind gas prices or food prices or scarcity in any number of different things because of the concept of war, inflation, quantitative easing, geopolitical structures, how do you reduce that down? I've reduced it down to something everybody can understand. And therefore, you'll find that when you actually put the case to people, you want lower gas prices, you want these gas prices, and here's the pros, here's the cons. Every normal Canadian, every reasonable Canadian who just spends the time looking at that is quite capable of making a decision. Every one of them.
So
and the problem today is we think they can't. Canadians are better than you think.
On Citizen, on your app, you're going to have the implication of gas prices into a simple point form, pros and cons?
Yes. So we have a breakup. The platform breaks things into two things. The legislative calendar, that is everything from the speech from the throne to prorogation. Okay, so committee meetings, first readings, second readings, proposal, everything that's on the docket will be seen by them. These are legislative pieces that are going through the governmental machine to produce laws. That's one side of it, okay? On the other side of it, you have what are called issues. These are things that have not made it to the legislative process yet. It's not going through the parties. It's not going through the legislative machines, like climate change or women's issues or liberation of LGBT communities or Indigenous issues for people that are Indigenous like me. These things are major issues that need to be broken up into smaller pieces so that they can be consumed and people can opine about them. But more importantly, before they do any of that, they understand the context of the issue. And this isn't hard, okay? All you have to do is give people all the points of view on a single issue so that if your spectrum is left or right, you can go from left to right, 3 or 4 different issues from 3 or 4 credible parties who all commit to giving it, and the information is presented and then people can think about it. You don't need a political science education or a university degree to understand common sense and people who explain things where you can assume they're authoritative. The cool thing about this is everything that happens on the platform is authoritative and everything is viewable and understandable. If you want to look at how we got to that, it's there for you to check.
Okay. It's a very idealistic attitude and I hope you're right. But let's take abortion as an example.
Yes.
I don't know if there is an authoritative view on abortion. The views are moral, they're religious, they're cultural, they're just historic.
Yes.
Is there an authoritative view? Maybe there is. I'm not sure. And I had this discussion just last night over dinner with somebody that they were a female that had considered abortion, was very pro-choice, but didn't think that abortion in the 3rd trimester is appropriate, which I think a lot of people actually, might personally recognize, even if they're very pro-choice. So, and that's not based on any authority. That's just based on a feeling, a sense that the life is supportable on its own during an arbitrary 3rd semester. So you tell me, how can you have an authoritative point of view on something that is so morality oriented, religious oriented, conscious oriented, almost by definition, unauthority oriented?
Yes. Well, if you look back at sort of the founding of the great democracies and the Enlightenment in particular, that period before the founding of these great democracies, the Enlightenment in particular, the big argument was the one you just made. Well, these are issues that are so complicated and difficult to solve. Nobody's ever going to be able to sit down and discuss. Look, we already know what the answer is. The answer is discourse, okay? You take the swords out of it, you put people opposite aisles, and those people fight it out just like it would be in a violent setting without weapons. And you got somebody in between, who's the speaker up there, that'll smack you in the head if you act improperly, because they're the actual authority. If somebody's going to beat you over the head and they're more important than the fighters, guess what you get? Okay, you get rational outcomes. You get people who consider things.
Again,
and I'm not talking about today in Parliament. I'm talking about the original intention behind the concept. The thesis is what we need to do now is digitize that. And we need to make that accessible to everybody. And we need to count everybody's opinion about it. Now, you asked the second question. How do you ensure authority? I didn't say truth. I said authority. Truth is a point of view, as you know. So you can have an opinion on abortion that says, 3rd trimester is wrong. You can have another opinion that says, at conception, life begins. But if you take those 2 polar groups, and roughly today, that's more, we don't even talk about the in-between anymore. Okay, we're out in this polarized crap because that's what media wants us to talk about, because that creates cycles that blow people up and make them nuts. Rage travels 6 times faster than truth. So guess what? We're not talking about reality. In Citizen, we're only going to be talking about reality, and the extremes can go, okay? In the end, when you present authoritative information, you get somebody from, say, the pro-choice camp, the pro-life camp, you get people in between, and you get a range of opinions that are expressed from authoritative people, meaning people who have agreed to provide that. And they will all be curated on our platform. Nobody will be able to provide an expert opinion on our platform unless they're validated. And you know what? Authority comes from credential checking. And I don't mean a credentialed journalist. I mean somebody who can credibly opine about a subject and not be inflammatory, gaslighting, nonsense, all the stuff that's psychologically harmful to people. And once you do that, you end up with magic. People make decisions that have a tendency to go from the extremes as today, and that the opinions start to coalesce around the mean. And when you coalesce, and you don't believe it, America in One Room, Stanford University study says it with exquisite precision.
But you force people to be reasonable and get together. I was at an all candidates meeting, and if you ranked people based on loudness and argumentative discourse, the New Blue and New Ontario parties would have won. The anti-vax, anti-mask crowd was the loudest and frankly the most visible in and they were all quoting what they deemed to be authoritative figures. This doctor said that, and this doctor said that, and this whatever said that, and what about mental health?
I got it.
And they were not listening to another point of view. They were so fervent in their point of view that they would not listen to a different point of view, even when the different point of view, frankly, had some gray associated with it. So you tell me, in that kind of an environment, when someone believes, any kind of abortion, even if it's a rape or because the baby is deformed or whatever, is wrong and against God's will, or that any kind of acceptance of a vaccine is putting a nuclear transmitter in my body that Gates is going to follow me around the world.
Yes.
If someone believes that so fervently, how can you have a appropriate discourse with them?
Well, the sort of short answer is I refer back to the scientific study. I can have an opinion about it until I'm blue in the face. But the fact is, America in One Room, the study done by Stanford, which has been repeated over and over and over since the original one a few years ago, repeatedly shows that the way we see the world today is in these extreme points of view, like as you just rightly pointed out, it's a religious issue. I can't get over it. There's no deviation possible because I'm Catholic, all this stuff. Turns out that when they brought people together of all stripes, people from Southie in Chicago, people from the Bronx, people from Bel Air in Los Angeles, people from Rancho Santa Fe in San Diego, rich and poor, black and white, women, men, LGBT, straight, Catholics, not. Guess what they did? They presented exactly the same views as you just said, and they solved every issue. Now, let me repeat that. People from Louisiana solved an issue with people from urban Manhattan Midtown, who would otherwise have said exactly the same things that you just described. Raging and fighting, and I have my authority. They not only solved it, they came up with a concrete legislative proposal that they could all agree on. Guess what happened? Guess why it worked? There are no politicians involved. Okay. Nobody was gaslighting to get them on their side.
This past week, the Supreme Court in the United States on absolute partisan divides decided on Roe v. Wade on abortion. Not one conservative jurist was able to persuade a liberal jurist. Not one liberal jurist was able to persuade a conservative jurist. And this isn't politics. This is the Supreme Court.
That's
One
correct.
would think these people are pretty smart. One would think they'd actually be able to negotiate back and forth. One would hope they'd listen to one another. They didn't, on completely partisan grounds. On a straight roll call, the conservative jurists 100% voted one way, the liberal jurists 100% voted the other way, and decided something that had been decided 50 years.
Look, if you look at American politics, having lived there for 15 years, I can tell you what happens there is coming everywhere else. Okay, they are literally the leaders in democracy, for better or for worse. And at the end of the day, that's symptomatic of another problem. Okay, people in the United States, remember, this is the most powerful country in history. Okay, this country has a lot at stake, and the stakes have never been higher in all of human history and all of democracy's history. The fight is so intense in that country, and so it should be, given the power that that state represents. But right now, it's become one camp versus another, and that's finding its way into Supreme Court appointments. I remember these fights over the most important fight in American politics is a Supreme Court justice appointment. And at the end of the day, why? Because everybody knows Supreme Court justices are only human. And anybody who thinks that somehow you listen to their confirmation hearings, everybody thinks they said, "Oh, we won't overturn Roe v. Wade." You need to listen to what they say to understand what they didn't say. That, okay, they are absolutely subject to the vagaries of being human. And if we think law is going to protect us and the rule of law is the only thing that matters, the only guarantor of a society that doesn't turn into Crazyville is the people themselves are standing there guaranteeing the governments do what they do. Otherwise, you know what you end up with? This type of nonsense where a Supreme Court loses credibility in the eyes of its own people. And when that happens, really nasty stuff starts happening in democracies thereafter. Okay, this has got to be fixed. And people have to stop allowing politicians to turn them into crazy makers that are going to destabilize our democracies further.
We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments on Citizen with Murray Simser in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Well, I've had a wonderful time chatting with Murray Simser tonight on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 about how he and Citizen are going to change democracy. And I think, frankly, Murray, it's exciting, and I hope you're successful. I'm worried that you're not going to be, I have to admit it, but I'm going to be one of those people that are out there yelling and screaming for your support because I think it's fantastic. Remind us, how can we get on board? What do we need to do?
Visit citizen.world, CITIZN. That's citizen with no E, .world. And you will be able to sign up. There's a yellow button at the bottom of the People's API, the picture of Parliament. Just put your email in there and you will receive in the next short order an invitation to download the application. That's step one. Step two, don't give us too much trouble between now and the end of September as we are working out the bugs and we are bringing people on board. So imagine Facebook on day one, no users. It wouldn't be very interesting, you know, if people weren't posting things. So please give us special dispensation till the end of September. In the meantime, though, there's a hamburger menu in the app, 3 lines. If you click on it and you have ideas, you want to give feedback, you want to tell us about something you think should be in there, we'd love to hear from you. Give us feedback and we will reply and thank you for sharing that. In the meantime, the only other thing you can do is if you see our messages, please share them.
Murray, 5 years from now, what do you think our state of democracy is going to be?
The state of democracy in this world is going to be immeasurably altered. I have a more confident prognostication for where we'll be. I think we're going to succeed, and I think that you're going to see the people rise to what they should have been at the beginning of democracies, okay, and what they were. They are coming back. They are going to control governments. 5 years from now, you're going to have 20 million Canadians using the Citizen app. You're going to have 150 million Americans using the app, and you're going to have a dozen other countries that are using the app in the same way, and all the great democracies of the West, and then countries beyond. That power is going to generate so much money for the people because of the revenue that we generate off this platform, and that money is going to the people themselves. We're going to try to eliminate all of level 1 and 2 Maslow needs with this thing because the people should not be giving away their information and opinions for free. It's high time people control the means of production without being Marxist or communist. At the end of the day, what we want to do is make sure that democracies are governed by, for, and of the people.
You know, I got to tell you, Murray, I was out knocking on doors, talking to a lot of people during the provincial election, talking about, you know, a more simplistic, unelectronic application of some of the same policies that you're talking about, referendum, recall, proportional representation. I think all but maybe 1 or 2 people I spoke with said, this is great. We agree with it. But almost everyone said, but it's never going to happen because the institutional inertia that politicians and governments have for their current system. And unless you get a major party to support this, it's not going to happen.
I don't want any party supporting this. Point of fact, politicians aren't invited. You're not allowed on the platform as a politician. Now, all politicians are citizens. You're allowed on the platform as a citizen. So politicians, you go do your job, you run the country, and we'll do our job telling you what we want you to do when you run the country.
Murray Simser, Citizen, download that app. Come back in September and tell us how it goes. Good night, everybody.
I will, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Have a great summer.
Thank you.